occupy their respective seats. May I make a request to all to occupy their respective seats, please? And I would also want to request you to put your phones on a silent mode or switch them off. Thank you. To initiate the proceedings, I would request Dr. Amitabh to escort Dr. D.S. Rana and Professor Malik to the dais. Please, Dr. Amitabh, Dr. Rana sir, Dr. Malik sir. May I request Dr. Shubhiram Nandi to escort our guest for today, Dr. David Cooper and Mr. Pradip Burman to the dais, please. We request Dr. Shashi to please honor our guest and orator of today's evening, Dr. David Cooper, with a bouquet of flowers.
Be able to see me sitting behind flowers.
So I'm Dr. Ratna Chopra. I'm the first Gyan Burman Fellow. I'm in the capacity of being the first Gyan Burman Fellow on behalf of Gyan Burman Fellows through the length and breadth of the globe. The organizing committee of today's program, under the leadership of Dr. Shubhiram Nandi, the Gyan Burman family, I extend a warm welcome to each one of you in the hall today and to our esteemed guest, Dr. David Cooper. This fellowship program, Gyan Burman Fellowship, I would say, is a very unique program in this sense that it provides a structured academic schedule for all the Gyan Burman students. And I'm a direct beneficiary of this program. By direct beneficiary, I mean to say that it brought about a paradigm change in my approach to the surgical specialty, not just surgical gastroenterology. I was able to not just improve upon my skills, and apply those skills in improving the surgical procedures that we are doing at the hospital where I am currently, in Durrell Hospital. In terms of introducing new procedures, it also changed our approach to academics. The current schedule that we are following at our institute is on the lines of, if I'm allowed to call it, Dr. Nandi's academic module of teaching, which includes daily seminars, journal clubs, and audits, besides the regular seminars and skill activities. This journal club is a very special type of a journal club that it can be patented in 3 sequential steps of, is this right? Is this new? Is this right? And should we change? And which covers up everything. And I will be coming back to that again if we see Dr. David Cooper's oration for today. I would request each one of you to keep this trimodal concept in mind to be able to make the best out of it. Gyan Burman Fellowship Program is also unique in a way that Gyan Burman family has put in special efforts under the guidance of Dr. Shubhiram Nandi to give us extended teaching in the form of refeeders like these orations. This is the 10th one that is happening today. It helps not just the fellows to apply their mind, it also helps all the consultants to broaden their horizon and to think about new concepts which can be applied. What I'm saying may be sounding superfluous, but actions speak louder than words. And the waiting list, if I'm not wrong, is more than a year for Gyan Burman fellows to join, which speaks volumes about how interested people are in joining this. It is a wonderful link, I would say, between the post-graduation program and the super specialty in the field of surgical gastroenterology. And by that I mean that today's National Medical Council is envisaging these kinds of trainings, and I think Gyan Burman Fellowship fits well into one which can be considered for being, I would say, accredited as an NMC accredited program. Do we think that today's oration is just a casual oration because somebody knew Dr. Cooper? It is not that. It is a very well thought of program which has been planned, if I'm allowed to say that again, by somebody who had put forth the National Organ Transplant Act. I'm sure there must be something more than just an oration at the back of his mind. I think he is wanting the fellows and the esteemed audience and the consultants to keep in mind and apply their mind on the fact that is it a realistic possibility to expand the donor pool for organ transplants, and that if it is possible, maybe even if one person in this audience is able to apply the mind on it, I think the job will be done. Now, is this new, like we were talking about? It is all of us would have heard about, in ancient India, about Ganesh, Daksh and Narsimha. Ganesh with the head of an elephant, Daksh with the head of a goat, and Narsimha with the head of lion. Greek mythology talks about Lamassu, in which he has the head of a human being, the body of a bull, and wings of a bird. Greek mythology speaks about two people, I think if I'm remembering the name correctly, I think Ceres and Dicaris, who were given wings of a bird to fly from one part of the globe to the other. Sicaris could not complete it, but probably Dicaris completed the flight. We have many such examples, and to make it a bit, I would say, hilarious, I was told about this. I will fail in my duty if I do not mention. My son talked about it. Indian movies, if people have seen Badshah, there is a fictitious doctor there who talks about placing an artificial eye of a frog in a child because it matched the size of the other eye. Then he also talks about that what he's going to do now is that in Badshah place two eyes, one that of a goat and the other that of an owl, so that this person could see throughout day and throughout night. In the day with the eye of a goat and in the night with the eye of owl. My purpose of speaking all that is to keep your interest alive and maybe make your brain more fertile in receiving what Dr. Cooper has to deliver to us from his real-time experience and not from what has been spoken of in mythology. With these words, I would want you to put your hands together to give a big round of applause to our guest, Dr. Cooper. May I now invite Dr. D.S. Rana to please bless us with a few words of
Professor Cooper, an eminent organ transplant surgeon and scientist in the field of transplantation in general and xenotransplantation in particular. Welcome you We will be very delighted to hear you today evening. Professor Sir Nindi, well-known and very eminent and dedicated surgeon, my revered teacher, my friend Dr. Vinod Malik, the Dean of Treatment right now, and also very well-known professor of surgery. Dr. Pradip Burman, Mr. Pradip Burman, who very kindly donated money for this operation and for the activity of this foundation. Dr. Gyan Burman, who is very kindly and the right hand of Dr. Sani. Invited guests, I can see a lot of my friends sitting there, who are not from Ganga Ram Hospital, senior faculty of Ganga Ram Hospital, trustees and all people who are here to attend this oration. I welcome you all on behalf of Ganga Ram Hospital. I should like to speak only one thing about Ganga Ram Hospital. All of you know about it now. That apart from providing ethical healthcare, affordable and accessible to all sections of society, we are firmly committed to excel in the field of medical education and research. And we feel proud that non-government sector, we are amongst the top. That's all I would like to say about Ganga Ram Hospital. But I would like to spend 1 minute on introducing Professor Nandi, who is going to introduce Professor Cooper. I know Professor Nandi from the day when I was doing nephrology at All Institute of Medical Sciences and learned a lot from him. He was very actively involved in kidney transplantation, or being dais surgeon. He had been assisting at that time. There were not some dedicated kidney transplant surgeon, liver transplant surgeon. He had been assisting Professor Dhawan, and I was the first resident in nephrology at that place. And Dr. Shiv Singh was sitting here, he was the first resident in gastroenterology. I learned a lot from him, from Gyan Burman and other people, how dedicated they are to their profession. He joined Sir Ganga Ram Hospital in the 90s. And apart from providing surgical care to various patients, even at the age of his surprise age, he's 86 plus, if I'm not mistaken, he's already running in 87th. Even at this time, he daily operates on his operating days. He is a person who, if he is in Delhi, he will be seen every Sunday, first surgeon to come and take his round operation at the same hospital. He is a person who never believes seeing investigation or seeing MRI or CT and then giving diagnosis and start giving interpretation. He is a person who likes to listen to patients, who likes to interact with the patient, likes to learn everything. And that's where doctors are required to sort of touch with the patient. Dedicated to the profession, we are proud of you, sir. He is a person who became, say, a very, very helping hand in bringing academics and research in this institution. And became right hand of late Dr. K.C. Mahajan. And eventually, we have got this sort of department and institute in the hospital. But though he had done kidney transplantation, he had not done liver transplantation. When he came to the Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, there was a very intense desire of two people, late Dr. S.K. Samant and Dr. K.C. Mahajan, that we must have active liver transplant program. At that time, we were already having very active kidney transplant program. And I remember their weekly meeting with each other and trying very hard to bring liver transplantation. And ultimately we succeeded in making or achieving excellence in liver transplantation in Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. It is only about 10 years back when other hospitals started doing it. But in this hall only about 10 years back he told that about 70% of transplant surgeons, those who are doing liver transplant surgery, they were trained at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. And at that time, not today, but at that time, we were amongst the first in the world and first few in the Asia carrying liver transplant surgery. Thank you, sir, for bringing the order to Ganga Ram Hospital. So today, about I think he will be speaking about Gyan Burman Oration also, but I must convey at this time my thanks to Pradip Burman to help us in starting this foundation, under which, Dr. Nandi had trained almost 150 students, surgeons from across country and across countries, many African countries, Gulf nations, and they are working there as his ambassadors. So, with these few words, I would not like to come to you and Professor Cooper. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for highlighting how importantly and what a rare this situation is that within a private hospital, there is another independent unit which is working in collaboration and bringing about so many publications and training people. I would now request Professor V.K. Malik, a teacher of teachers, my teacher as an undergraduate student in surgery, my daughter's teacher as an intern. So I would want to invite you to the dais to speak about Gyan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ratna, for this introduction. I know I'll be very brief because we are all here to hear as oration from Professor Cooper. So I just be very brief and give little introduction to the hospital, the milieu in which we work. So Professor David Cooper, guest of honor and the orator for the 10th Gyan Burman Oration today, Professor D.S. Rana, Chairman, Sir Ganga Ram Trust Society, Mr. Pradip Burman, Chairman, Gyan Burman Foundation, Professor Shomiran Nandi, Co-Chair, Gyan Burman Foundation, and Founding Dean, Gripma, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have been asked to speak about Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, but before I begin the story of the hospital, a few words about the founder, Sir Ganga Ram, will be in order. Sir Ganga Ram was a genius civil engineer, a renowned architect, a philanthropist, and a humanitarian with sterling qualities of heart. His innovative ideas made Punjab a granary that saved millions from starvation and saved countless lives. His creativity is writ large all over the city of Lahore. It is said that he earned like a prince and gave away like a saint. Moved by the pitiable condition of widows and orphans, with the resolve to improve their lots, he started many initiatives to empower them to live a life of honor and dignity. It is in this context that he established Sir Ganga Ram Hospital in Lahore. Sir Ganga Ram Hospital soon became a center of quality healthcare in Lahore, and to this day stands tall, providing healthcare and medical education. That from a humble beginning, the hospital will become a major reminder of his legacy would have even surprised him. After partition, Sir Ganga Ram Trust Society felt the need to continue to honor the legacy of the founder by establishing a hospital in his name, and thus was born the famed Sir Ganga Ram Hospital in Delhi. The hospital was inaugurated by the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, on the auspicious Baisakhi Day in 1954. The hospital run by the trust follows a unique not-for-profit model aimed at providing state-of-the-art tertiary care at affordable cost, besides providing free compassionate care to economically weaker section and low-income group patients as part of Founder's vision. To achieve this objective, the hospital has earmarked 20% beds where treatment is provided free of cost. The hospital got a major fillip when super specialty wing was inaugurated by the then President Sri K.R. Narayanan in 2004. Besides greatly adding to the existing infrastructure, super specialty block equipped with advanced operating room, ICU, catapulted SGRS to the front league in providing most advanced tertiary care at par with the very best anywhere. This complex is home to our state-of-the-art laboratory infrastructure. Our labs are capable of conducting most advanced biochemical, microbiological, hematological, and genome testing. Now, with the commissioning of the state-of-the-art executive block equipped with the latest radiotherapy and diagnostic equipment, the hospital has become a comprehensive facility for delivering most advanced care for the cancer patient. The hospital takes great pride in being premier academic institution that trains large number of doctors every year to provide for future specialists and super specialists across 51 disciplines, besides offering subspecialty fellowship in 20 more. We started academic program in 5 specialty with 10 trainees in 1984. Today the number has increased to over 120 trainees in 50 disciplines. The impact of our academic program can be gauged by the fact that over 50% of all living donor liver transplants are being performed by surgeons who are trained at SGRH. Our hospital is the leading private sector institution in contributing to research. It ranks second amongst all private sector institutions and 11th overall among all private and public sector institutions in contributing to research from India. It is a constant endeavor of GBLU, that's Ganga Ram Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education Research, to nurture research. Our bi-monthly journal CMRP, indexed in MBase and DOAJ, is now in 13th year of continuous publication. This is testament to our commitment to promote research amongst our fraternity. It is indeed very satisfying to note that our partnership with Gyan Burman Foundation has resulted in providing a pool of trained gastrointestinal and hepatobiliary surgeons not only to India but also to the neighboring countries. Till date, over 150 surgeons have got opportunity to be trained under this program. We are thankful to the chairman of this foundation, Mr. Pradip Burman, and co-chairman Professor Nandi for steering this program to such an eminence. Today, we will see another story added to this much-storied partnership when Professor Cooper delivers the much-awaited 10th Gyan Burman Oration. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving a brief outline of such a big hospital in a short time. Indeed, it is one of the most sought after hospitals. I would now want to request Mr. Pradip Burman. All of us as Gyan Burman Fellows are hugely indebted to you and the Burman family, sir, and to Dr. Shabira Nandi for having started these training programs. So please, he will tell us about how the Gyan Burman Trust came into being. So.
A very good evening to you. And Ratna has told us about the frog's eye and the elephant's head and the many things that are going on. When I see that the lecture is on xenotransplantation, I just read a few days ago in the paper that it was transplanted from a pig into a human being. And here I am going to listen to Dr. Cooper, who is a pioneer in that sport. But I must get back to Gyan Burman and what it meant to us and how we started the whole thing. Gyan Burman was the eldest of three brothers, focused and hardworking. He set a standard that his siblings strive to meet. Schooled at St. Paul's in Darjeeling, he spent a few months in St. Xavier's College in Calcutta before moving to the USA to study pharmacology at the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science. He returned with his degree in 1966, and my uncle, Sri P.C. Burman, immediately began training him to manage production at the Dabur factory in Calcutta. It took him less than a year to take complete charge of the factory. He enjoyed his social and club life in Calcutta, but nothing could prevent him from being at work at 8 a.m. every morning. He died in 2001, and the Gyan Burman Liver Unit, GBLU, was established in his memory at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, Delhi. 23 years have passed since the GBLU was started under the able guidance and leadership of Dr. Burman-the, and I am pleased to see that we have accomplished whatever we set out to do. During the past 23 years, the department has trained 147 doctors from various states of India, from Kerala to Kashmir, and abroad. International fellows include doctors from Kenya, Mexico, Fiji, Turkmenistan, Sudan, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Mauritius, Bangladesh, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, the USA, Greece, and Pakistan. The department has rented and furnished a flat for fellows who come from outside Delhi. Besides training doctors from all over the world, we have published books, funded research papers, sponsored doctors, and conferences. We have organized 9 orations by eminent doctors from the world over, appreciated by the management of Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. You can see all the books outside as you enter, and I was amazed to see the number of books which are published by the Gyan Burman Liver Unit. The department has published more than 400 articles and 60 books, including 27 annual audits of the Department of Liver Transplantation in India. 10 years of SGLT, Residence Manual and Liver Transplantation Handbook for Patients. Our name is well known and our efforts have borne results. Our family is proud of the achievements of the unit and considers it a worthy memorial to a well-loved and respected man. I congratulate Dr. Nandi and Dr. Mehtab Yadav and his team with their success. I would like at this moment to express my deep appreciation to Dr. Nandi, who established Gyan Burman Fellowship and has done an excellent work in running Gyan Burman Liver Unit. Thank you, Dr. Nandi. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir, for this invaluable support to the Gyan Burman Liver Unit. And it is all the trainees from here are a reason for exponential extension of trainings further in their own respective institutes. I would now request Dr. Shamiran Nandi to give a briefing about our orator for today, Dr. Cooper. Dr. Nandi is the whole and soul person behind every training that every trainee receives at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital and these extended programs. There is a foresight behind it, let me remind you all, and I'm sure he will highlight what is the foresight that he has in mind for others. So.
I was in school, in a very posh school, St. Paul's, Darjeeling, with Pradip and Gyan Burman. And the headmaster or the rector, Mr. Leslie Goddard, used to tell us always that you who are very privileged should do something for some people who are less privileged than you. So against my mother's wishes to be a diplomat, I decided to be a doctor and to do something. When I qualified in England, every interview that I was asked, what do you plan to do in the future? So I said, I plan to bring the best care in the world to the poorest of the poor. I decided to qualify both as a physician as well as a surgeon. So luckily I passed the MRCP rather quickly. And I wanted to do cardiothoracic surgery. So I applied for a job, one of the best jobs in England, with Lord Brock and Mr. Donald Ross, who were probably the leading cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. My fellow house surgeon was Dr. David Cooper. And we worked together for 1 year, alternate days, very busy program, lots of complications. And after that, I decided that cardiothoracic surgery was not for me. Why? Because David outshone me completely. He was the star, and I was just there, also around. I decided to do GI surgery. I went to Cambridge and then to the Royal Postgraduate Medical School and eventually to the Mass General Hospital. And then, at the insistence of my wife, I came back to India. And I worked for 50 wonderful years in the All India Institute and in Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. And for that, I'm grateful to my wife, and I've dedicated the books to my wife. David had an outstanding career. After leaving Guy's, he worked with Donald Ross in the National Heart Hospital and was then the first heart transplant done in Europe. He then went to Papworth Hospital, Cambridge, with our mutual friend, Sir Terence English, who was also at Guy's, a friend of ours. And then he went to Magdalen College, Cambridge, where he was a fellow to our Director of Studies. After that, David went to South Africa, Cape Town, where he worked with the great Christian Barnard. And he's written a wonderful book on Christian Barnard, his strengths and his flaws. After Cape Town, he went to America, to Oklahoma, Birmingham, Boston, and Pittsburgh, and now he is in the Department of Transplantation Sciences in Harvard Medical School, Massachusetts General Hospital. I looked up David in Wikipedia, and I asked, who is the father of xenotransplant? And it promptly said, Mr. D.K.C. Cooper. And the reason for xenotransplant, I think he'll tell you more about this later, is that there's a great shortage of organs. People die of organ failure who need a transplant because there are not enough organs. And this is especially true in India because there are estimated 5 lakh people dying of organ failure and only 16,000 transplants done a year, including kidney, liver, lung, etc. So it's very important, but there are obviously problems to this. The problems are that the organs are rejected by the human, animal organs, and also people are worried about transmitting viruses. And also in India, I think especially, there will be problems, social and ethical problems about using animals to prolong human lives. But I think that it's a very interesting topic, and it is something in the future, not only in the future, because in the last 2 months or so, there have been 2 kidney transplants done from a pig to humans, and one of them, I think, is still living. And this is part of David Cooper's work. Finally, I'm very proud to have worked with David. I'm very pleased to have met him after all these years. And I am very grateful to him that he's consented to come here all the way to give the Gyan Burman Oration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for hosting this oration for today and for giving us all an opportunity to be with the leader in the field of xenotransplantation. So now, vision without action is said to be a daydream. Action without vision is supposed to be a nightmare. Now we are going to see a person who, with vision, has put a step forward into the field of xenotransplantation. And I'm sure he will tell us how the whole animal cell, or a part of animal cell like an animal shimmer, can be incorporated into the human body, not just for reasons of transplant, but also to treat many neuroendocrine diseases. I would request Dr. Cooper to start his oration. Before that, may I ask somebody to move the tables so that the whole screen is visible to all. Can the...
We can bring it down.
Well, thank you very much for inviting, and with the work that's been done, I'll comment on that as we go along. So, first of all, this is an annual oration, as you know, given to honor the late Gyan Burman and his brother, Pradip, who have supported the work of the unit at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. And it's a great honor for me to give this lecture in his honor. It's also been very wonderful for me to follow so many eminent surgeons who have given this lecture before me. I really appreciate being invited to come in and follow their great footsteps. Particularly 2 people, Sir Roy Khan, who trained both Shemran and me to some extent in general surgery and transplantation in the United Kingdom at the University of Cambridge, and Abhinav Humar, a Canadian Indian, who is a former colleague of mine at Pittsburgh and who worked closely with me in the research I'm going to report to you today. So it's very nice to be part of that group. Now, as you know, Shamran was a very modest person. He was educated in India, then went to Cambridge University, and then came down to Guy's Hospital in London for his clinical studies. He then did his surgical training in the UK, became a clinical and research fellow in the Massachusetts General Hospital, became an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School before he returned to India, as he's just told us, and then first at the All India Medical Institute, and then at the Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. And he performed his first liver transplant in the year 2000. And as he mentioned, we worked together for a period of time at Guy's when we were both very young, budding surgeons. Guy's was built again with a philanthropist who made a lot of money in selling books and in the East India Company. It was founded in 1728, so in 2 or 3 years time it'll have its 300th anniversary. This is what it was originally, and then in the early, about 100 years ago, it looked like this, the main hospital. And when we were there, it was rather downtrodden because this was after the Second World War, and the wing on the left of the picture, as you look at it, was not there anymore. It had been bombed and destroyed, so that was only that was all the hospital was left. But the wing was rebuilt while we were there, and the hospital moved back to its sort of former glory. This is a picture of Shamran with his classmates, and these were the group out of the 100 in the class that were appointed to junior hospital positions at the hospital, a very competitive position. And what he's modest about is that he came from Cambridge University, where the standard is very high to do his clinical work at Guy's. And at the final examination at Cambridge, of all the medical students at Cambridge, he won the gold medal, which is a remarkable achievement. And at Guy's, where about 3/4 of us had not been at Cambridge, but were at London University, he also won the gold medal. So quite a remarkable achievement. It really is impressive to me. And in his class, there were some people who did very well. There's a person, the third on the top row, who became a Fellow of the Royal Society, which is the greatest honor for a scientist in the United Kingdom, and not very often given to a medical scientist. And at the bottom row, sitting down on the right-hand side, is Sir Terence English, who became the president of the Royal College of Surgeons and started the first continuous heart transplant program in the UK, and also became master of one of the Cambridge colleges. So we had some very good colleagues with us at the time, both as students and also the teachers were very high caliber at the time. So Shamran really was an outstanding student, there's no question about it. And he tells you that he was overshadowed by me. That's not true at all. We were all overshadowed by him. So we worked together on the cardiac surgical program, which was relatively new in those days. Open heart surgery had only been going a few years, and so we were still learning all the time. And on the left of this picture, you can see Sir Russell Brock, who became Lord Brock while we were working with him. He was president of the Royal College of Surgeons, was the founder of heart surgery in Europe, basically. And on the right-hand side is Mr. Donald Ross, his junior colleague, who was probably the best cardiac surgeon in Europe at the time. So we were very fortunate to be trained by some top-class people. And this is a picture of the Queen as she was then visiting the unit. She doesn't look too excited about looking at heart-lung machines, but that was part of her position, I'm afraid she had to do. So I was greatly stimulated by working with these innovative surgeons, probably the best cardiac surgery program in Europe at the time, and one of the best in the world. And it grabbed my attention and imagination. And so this is how I thought I saw myself, the world-famous surgeon on his way to the operating room. And I would always, I wasn't married at the time, I always liked to chat with the nurses. And the nurses all loved me. And I love me too. So this is my view of cardiac surgery at the time. I think now cardiac surgery has lapsed, and it's the hepatobiliary surgeons, the liver transplant surgeons, who are the best in the world at the moment. And I like this, it brings us down to size. I'm sometimes reminded of the differences between a rhinoceros and a heart surgeon. One has a thick skin, a small brain, and charges a lot. The other is a large animal that lives in Africa. And you're only allowed to make that joke if you are a cardiac surgeon, by the way. So you can see. And one of our predecessors in this program with Lord Brock and Donna Ross was Sir Roy Khan. He had been the house surgeon there a few years before us, before he became Professor of Surgery at Cambridge University. And he, as you know, was one of the great pioneers of transplantation. And I firmly believe he should have won a Nobel Prize, because he established the field with Tom Starzl, and between them they should have won the Nobel Prize. But he pointed out that in those early days, modern immunology has been driven and owes its scientific preeminence to the rash behavior of ignorant surgeons. They transplanted the kidney and then said, oh look, it gets rejected, we need to find out why. And so it was very much hit and miss at the time. And in fact, one of the very earliest transplant surgeons, who was a Frenchman, told me that in 1951, when he did the first transplants, kidney transplants, he would go to the prison where they were going to guillotine a prisoner. They would bring out the dead body, headless body, on the floor. He would take the kidneys out on the floor with a little lamp showing happened to do it, take the kidneys back to the hospital and transplant them. It was that primitive at that time. Something that we can't almost imagine these today. But that's how they started out, and that's where we've got from. You have to begin somewhere, and this is where we've got to today. So I'm going to talk about xenotransplantation, which is cross-species transplantation between various animal groups. And we're obviously mainly interested in transplantation from an animal into a human. And originally the work was mainly primates, non-human primate transplants into humans. And we've moved on to pig to human transplantation. Sherman told me that this was the title I gave to talk about xenotransplantation. But I think it would be much more exciting if I'd given it a name I've used before, Frankenswine, or Bringing Home the Bacon. I think this is a catchy tune, a catchy title for a talk that I want to. And I know that quite a few in the audience here are not medically qualified, so I'm going to try to pitch the talk of interest to those who don't know a lot about medicine, but at the same time not bore those who know a lot about medicine, as I know there are a lot here. So you'll have to forgive me if I don't always say it exactly as for you to understand it. In America now, we always have to talk about a conflict of interest, and I'm a consultant to eGenesis, which is a company that provides some of these genetically engineered pigs. But the views I can express are my own and not those of eGenesis, although I think they would agree with pretty well everything I say. And I'd like to acknowledge that there are many previous and current colleagues and research fellows from around the world who've worked with me over the last 40 years on this problem. And obviously, it's not something that one person can do, it's a team of people, as it is here in your hospital that does the work. Now today, I'm by definition an expert, because in America the definition of a medical expert is a guy from out of town with slides, and I'm a guy from out of town with slides. So you can take it today that you're hearing the words of a real expert. Now, let's look at the very early work in xenotransplantation, and it goes back over 100 years actually. There were transplants in the early part of the last century between animals and humans. Very unsuccessful, of course, but it's something that people have been aiming for a long time. And initially I mentioned that it was really to do with primates, non-human primate transplants. This idea of blending animals together goes back a long way. You would know more about it with your religious background, but this is from the mythology, Greek mythology, and you can see it's an animal with a mixture of parts. And this is a Lamassu, which is now the actual logo of the International Xenotransplantation Association, which was formed some years ago. And it caught on quite well for a long time. For example, even in the 17th century, 18th century, people had blood transfusions from animals, particularly from sheep, because sheep were thought to be rather benign and docile, and they would use this sheep blood transfusions in patients who had psychiatric disease, because they thought it would calm them down. Here's a donkey giving blood to a patient. Many patients must have died from this, but there aren't many reports about it, because if you put blood from a pig into a baboon, for example, now, which we've been doing, you can destroy a lot of the red cells very rapidly, which is not obviously good for the patient. So, but they did show this interest for a couple of hundred years before this year. And this is the picture on the left of Alexis Carrel, who was a very well-known surgical researcher, who won the Nobel Prize in 1912 because of his work in joining blood vessels together. And if you can't join a blood vessel together, you obviously can't do a transplant. So it was very fundamental. The person with it is Lindbergh, the first man to fly across the Atlantic Ocean in a plane. And he worked with Carrel because he was interested in things like heart-lung machines and so on. So they worked together for some time. And Carrel was a man of considerable vision. Now, he wasn't a very good man, I think, but he was a man of considerable vision. He said at one time, the ideal method would be to transplant in man organs of animals easy to secure and operate on, such as pigs, for example. But it would in all probability be necessary to immunize the organs of the pig against the human serum. What he's saying is we're going to protect the pig organ against the human immune response, which is exactly what we've been trying to do for the last 30 or 40 years. We've got to modify the pig to be resistant to the damage that can be caused when we try to reject that organ. So he was completely right, and as you see, it's in 1906 that he came up with this, and so he was a man well ahead of his time, but he had the right approach there. And he says the future of transplantation of organs for therapeutic purposes depends on the feasibility of xenotransplantation. He felt this was going to be the answer. Now, as I say, because of our closeness to non-human primates, such as chimpanzees, people concentrated their attention on transplanting non-human primate organs into humans. And one of the people who did this was Keith Riensma, who sadly died, but he was a good friend of mine and was really a pioneer in this field. And back in the 1960s, he transplanted some chimpanzee kidneys into patients. And he put both kidneys in. He did 6 patients, he operated 6 patients, and 5 of them died quite quickly within a few weeks, either of infection because they were getting too much immunosuppressive therapy or because of the rejection. But here's a pair of kidneys at the top of the picture here. He put both the chimpanzee kidneys in, so that because the chimpanzees were smaller than the humans, so he put both the kidneys in. And you can see they look basically normal, and histologically, microscopically, they showed no features of rejection. And this was 9 months after he transplanted the kidneys into the patient. And you can see at the bottom of the picture the patient's own kidneys, which were terribly diseased. And this patient was a woman who was a school teacher. She went back to work as a school teacher for several months before she suddenly died, possibly because of some electrolyte disturbance in the blood that the kidneys weren't dealing with well. So that was the most primitive immunosuppressive therapy they had at the time. So I think if we were going to use chimpanzee kidneys today, we'll be doing very well with the immunosuppression we have, but obviously we're not going to do that for ethical and logistic reasons. But this was an amazing experience back in the 1960s. And following that, James Hardy, a transplant surgeon in Mississippi, decided to transplant a patient's heart. And here's a picture he gave me of the heart from a chimpanzee in the patient immediately after he transplanted. But the heart was not really big enough to support the circulation of this patient. It was a lot bigger than the chimpanzee. And the heart failed within a few hours, and the patient sadly died. But it was a big step forward, and this was the first heart transplant ever performed. This was about 3 or 4 years before Barnard did his first transplant in Cape Town. And one interesting thing about this is the consent form that the patient's family signed. The patient was comatose, was not a good candidate for a transplant, and so couldn't sign a consent form himself. but the family signed this consent form on his behalf. You can see it's one paragraph, you can't see what it says, but what it does say is that no heart transplant has ever been performed before, which was true, but it makes no mention that we might put in a chimpanzee heart, which today we would be legally in big trouble if we had a consent form like that. The consent forms we're using today are small books of legal jargon, which is necessary to cover the backs of the surgeons in the hospital and so on. So it was a very interesting experience, and at that time, Sir Peter Medawar, a British transplant immunologist who's considered the father of transplant immunology, won the Nobel Prize for his work in 1960. He looked at what was going on and he said, we shall solve the problem of organ transplantation by using xenografts one day if we try hard enough, and maybe in less than 15 years. Now, as you see, he said that in 1969, so even Nobel Prize winners can get it completely wrong because we're still struggling to get where we want to get to. But I think he was referring if we used non-human primate organs rather than pig organs, which would have been much easier. So this concerned the non-human primates for some time because they realized that their lives were in jeopardy. And so because of the difficulty of breeding non-human primates and of waiting till they grow to a full size, which would be, say, 9 or 10 years, and they breed in small numbers, one or two of us began to think that this is not going to work out, and we need to look for another animal as a source of the organs. And so, and it became increasingly difficult. Here's a picture from the data in the United States. You can see in the black line, the number of patients on the waiting list is going up every year. This is a bit out of date now, but it's still going up. And the number of transplants in red from the donors in blue is almost static, going up a little bit. So the situation, because of the results are good, the situation is getting tougher and tougher. The number of people waiting is longer, more and more. And if you're waiting on dialysis for a kidney transplant in the United States, you have a 6 times better chance of dying than you do of getting a transplant. So it's a very tough situation. So we hit upon the idea of perhaps using pigs. For a number of logistic reasons, they're much easier to breed, and they breed in large numbers, etc., etc. So the pig was selected at the time. And if you want a lot of pigs, most pigs, in a litter, they have perhaps 8 or 10 or 12 piglets. But if you want to treat them with some sort of hormones, you can get a litter of up to 29 if you wanted to, as in this picture here. So much easier from a logistic point of view than breeding non-human primates for this purpose. So what are the advantages of xenotransplantation? Xeno, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, is from the Greek word xeno for foreign, so it's a foreign transplant. Well, the obvious advantages are you'd have an unlimited number of donor organs. We wouldn't be in the situation we're in now, where you can have people waiting in an ICU for perhaps 3 or 6 months and still dying before they get a transplant. Or people being on dialysis for up to 10 years in the United States and waiting for an organ. And many of those, as I'll show you later, die while they're waiting. So the unlimited number of organs available would be very, very important. But even more so, those organs are available electively. You get a patient who comes in today who needs a kidney transplant or a heart transplant, you pick up the phone, you phone the pig company, and they deliver the organ tomorrow. Not what we're doing now, waiting for weeks or years in some cases. The other thing is that all the patients we have who are become organ donors have suffered brain death, one way or the other. And that can be very damaging to your organs, and it changes your whole metabolism after your brain death. And so that can be also damaging to the function of your organs. So these pigs will not be brain dead, they will be anesthetized, and the organs will be taken out while they're living. And so avoid the effects, the detrimental effects of brain death will not be impacted on the organs as you get a transplant, which is quite a major advantage. And theoretically, we should have pigs that are infection-free. We should be able to transplant any infection with human organ donors, particularly deceased donors who we don't have much time to sort them out before we need to take the organs and transplant them. We do sometimes transfer viruses or bacteria with the organ from the donor to the recipient, which can obviously be bad news. And less obvious advantages, when I was running a heart transplant program, I would be very selective of the patients that I put onto the waiting list because I didn't want to waste a human organ on a patient who wasn't going to do very well long term. So I tried to choose the best patients who I thought had a good chance of living 5 or 10 or longer years. If we had an unlimited number of donors, we wouldn't have to be so selective. We could say, well, this patient's probably not going to do very well for more than a couple of years, but let's give him the chance because we have plenty of donors, so we're not having to sort of ration them out. And there are some countries, particularly Japan, for example, where they have all the technology, but there's a cultural barrier to organ donation from the deceased subject. And so they do very, very few heart transplants because nobody donates the organs. They do a lot of living-related or living kidney transplants and even liver transplants, but they don't do many when it requires a donation from a deceased person. And so their numbers of transplants will go up enormously. And finally, if you look at diabetes, and you could cure that with peak insulin-producing cells that we have and which we lack if you have diabetes. If you're talking about that, in America alone, there are 30 million people with diabetes who could be cured by a xenotransplant. This thing's not working suddenly. Just how can somebody come up and see, give me a hand to see how I can get the next one to do? I don't know why it's not moving now suddenly. To get the next slide. Thanks. So this is a pig kidney put into a baboon as a surrogate of a human. Many years ago, it's what we call a wild-type pig kidney. There's been no genetic engineering. And this is what it likes once you release the vascular clamps and the kidney is reperfused. It looks very healthy, nice and pink. Everything's working. May start passing urine immediately, doing very well. But within minutes, it can look like this, and you have to then take it out because it's dead. There's been thrombosis in the vessels, hemorrhage. Some of the vessels are burst because they're blocked, and the pressure in them is too much, and the whole thing is destroyed. And if same thing happens in the heart, and here's the microscopic appearance of the heart, and you can see all those red cells there. That's blood, which has burst in all the blood vessels and into the heart, obviously destroyed it. The pink stuff is the heart muscle, and so the whole thing is destroyed just as quickly as the kidney. And so we had a major problem when we started looking at using pig organs for transplantation. And what is happening there, if you look at the bottom of the picture, that curved surface is the surface of the blood vessels in the pig kidney or the pig heart, and sticking out from there are some sugars. There's sugar, they're a bit like glucose. The most important one is a galactose sugar. And those sugars, we have antibodies against those sugars, which we develop early in infancy. And once we have those antibodies, you put a pig organ in, they will immediately bind to the pig organ and activate what we call the complement system, which will destroy the organ rapidly, which we've seen with those pictures. You might say, well, why do we have developed these anti-pig antibodies in infancy? It's because when our gut is colonized by bacteria and viruses, some of those bacteria and viruses have the same sugars on the surface as the pig has. And so we develop it as these antibodies as a defensive mechanism. Unfortunately, it cross-reacts with the pig organ and kills it. And this can happen whether you've ever eaten any pig or pork in your life or not. It happens to all of us. So it's a real major problem. So the first thing we had to sort out is how can we prevent these antibodies from binding to the pig organ and causing a very, very early rejection within minutes. And Kraus Hammer, who was a surgeon as well as a veterinary surgeon, he said the evolutionary distance between man and pig when they began to diverge, and the evolution is 80 million years. So he says what we're trying to do is to outwit evolution. We're trying to make that 80 million years shrink back to nothing. So I think that's why it's taken us a long time. It's taken 40 years to do this. that it's a major undertaking. And this is how it looked to me for a long time. On the left was the human rejection response to a pig organ, massive rejection response that happened very quickly. And then on the right is people like me trying to stop it from causing injury to it. And obviously it was a major problem, and it's only in relatively recent years that we've overcome that problem. I like this quote. It's a little like wrestling a gorilla. But you don't quit when you're tired, you quit when the gorilla is tired. So we had to wait for this immune response to be controlled before we could move ahead. And this is a quote from Willem Kolff, who designed the first effective dialysis machine in the world, which he did, by the way, in the Netherlands, his home country, when he was occupied by the Nazis. So it was quite a remarkable achievement to do that under those circumstances. And he said, even without hope you should undertake, even without success you should persevere. I think this is the purpose of all medical research. You need to keep persevering until you solve the problem. Now, Norman Shumway was really the father of heart transplantation. He did all the experimental work before Barnard did the first heart transplant in a patient. And he rather cynically said, xenotransplantation is the future of transplantation and always will be. It's always going to be the future, it's never going to be now. Well, finally, we've proved him wrong because, as you've heard, we've done some transplants in patients now, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And Sir Roy Khan, our predecessor in the unit at Guy's Hospital, he was a little bit less cynical. He said, clinical xenotransplantation is just around the corner, but it may be a very long corner. And he was being proved correct. It's taken all of us much longer than we thought. Some of you here may know of Randall Morris. He ran the research program at Stanford University in heart transplantation for some years. He's sort of semi-retired now. And he said, some years ago, he said there are 3 golden rules for achieving successful xenotransplantation. But then he added, unfortunately, we don't know any of them. And he was quite right. But now we do know some of them, so we've made some progress. So what do we know now? What's made us progress? Well, there are 2 things. First of all, the ability to gene edit or genetically engineer pigs, which we've developed to quite a high skill now, because that has changed the whole aspect of the work, because we can now knock out these sugars we want to, or do something in the pig. And the second is that we've got a much better immunosuppressive therapy available to us now, just coming through, which is much more effective than the immunosuppressive therapy we've been using for the last several years. So those 2 things have made a big difference to our success. And the first is the gene therapy, what we can do remarkably in a pig cell to make the pig that's born from that cell, make that pig more resistant to the immune response of the human. And I think this is perhaps the most important slide I'm going to show you. This is the first occasion when we can modify the donor of a transplant as opposed to just treating the recipient. Everything we've done up to now is to suppress the response in the recipient, which has side effects and detrimental effects. We've never been able to modify the donor, but now we do have this, and this has immense potential, and I firmly believe that eventually the patient of a xenograft will not need to receive any immunosuppressive therapy because we'll be able to do it all in the pig and not in the patient. So the patient will not be at higher risk for infection or for cancer or whatever the complications of immunosuppression might be. So the first thing we've done to the pigs, actually it's not the first, it's the second, but anyway, is to delete the expression of those 3 sugar molecules, which we call antigens, on the pig cells against which humans have these preformed antibodies. I go back to that slide again. Instead of those pig sugars sticking out from the surface, they are now gone. They've been deleted by the genetic engineering. So there's no target for those antibodies anymore. So it doesn't matter whether they've been primed by gastrointestinal bacteria or viruses. They cannot damage the organ anymore because they're not on the organ. So this is a very important point. And the second thing is we know that certain things that cause this rejection, they're species specific. So if you have a human, when we destroy a bacteria, bacteria in our blood, for example, we don't destroy our own tissues, because our own tissues have specific regulatory molecules on them that protect us from that thing. And pigs have the same sort of pig regulatory molecules, but they're not very efficient against the human immune response. And so what was done by a colleague of ours, and I'm sure Sharon remembers him too, in Cambridge in the 1990s, David White, he just put into the pig human complement regulatory proteins, which protected the pig to some extent from the human immune response. He didn't knock out the sugars, that wasn't possible at that time. In fact, that was a group, my own group actually suggested that, but it couldn't be done at that time. And this was the first pig born who was genetically engineered, who was going to be a useful organ transplantation, and that's David White with that pig. And he showed, and there was one or two Indians involved in this work in Cambridge at the time. He showed that the introduction of even one human protective gene alone and into the wild-type pigs, otherwise no other genetic, increased survival of a pig kidney transplant in monkeys from less than a day, which I showed you before, to a maximum of 3 months. So it made a big difference. And we now have pigs with at least 7 protective genes in them. And so we've now got pigs with no antigens expressed on the surface, because we've knocked those out, and we have pigs with 7 human protective genes in them to protect them from other mechanisms. So that's probably the most important way in which we've actually made progress. But we've also had the ability to use novel immunosuppressive therapy that wasn't available before. And for those of you in the field of transplantation, you will notice from the current immunosuppressive regimen that I'm using in my laboratory, it's not excessive. We use a couple of doses of anti-thymocyte globulin. We use one very small dose of rituximab. We give C1 esterase inhibitor just at the time of the transplant when there's a systemic complement activation. And then our maintenance is this new drug, an anti-CD154 monoclonal antibody, blocks the co-stimulation, T-cell co-stimulation pathway, and rapamycin, corticosteroids, and tocilizumab, which is an anti-IL-6 blockade agent. But not excessive. Not people have always thought we're going to give such excessive treatment to these patients who are going to get a kidney transplant or a big kidney transplant that it'll be detrimental. I don't think it is. And to show you how efficient it is, in the black line is the sort of treatment we give today in the monkeys, and you can see we've got survival up to 250 days. In the red line is if we give the standard treatment that we give to a patient today, and you can see we get survival up to about a month. That's it. And since we did this study, things have improved a bit, but because of more manipulations of the pig. But you can see there is a significant difference between the drugs we have available today and the drugs we had available some years ago. Now, are these organs going to work okay? You may protect them from rejection, but are they going to function okay? Because we need them to do what a human kidney or a human heart will do. And there are 1 or 2 things we've noticed. For example, if you take out both of the non-human primate kidney, let's say you're putting this pig kidney into a baboon as a surrogate for humans, if you take out both of the baboon's kidneys, so you're sure that the patient or the baboon is being kept alive by the pig kidney, they become dehydrated. And if you leave one of the baboon kidneys in, but you tie off the ureter so that it's not actually producing any urine, so you're still being survived by the pig kidney, they don't become dehydrated. But it is something that remaining kidney produces. It's a hormone that produces that if you take them both out, it's gone. If you leave one in, it's still there. And that's the hormone renin. And so the kidney, the baboon kidney, is doing something useful still, even though it's not helping to keep you alive in that respect. Now, luckily, in human patients who are undergoing a kidney transplant of any sort, generally speaking, my colleagues leave the human kidneys in, even if they're not very functional. So they're still producing this hormone. And so that's a way around this. So there is a difference here, but we seem to be getting around it. And the other thing is that it is well known, first again, described by Bob Soyne when he was in Cambridge 20 more years ago. The kidney, after the transplant, the kidney grows as if it's still in the pig. And the pig is growing much quicker than we are or the monkeys are. And so the pig kidney will grow quickly and could get too big for the abdomen. Certainly with the heart it's a problem because the heart's in a more compressed space. But this can be prevented either by selecting gene-edited miniature swine, so the background is a miniature swine, they don't grow very fast or very, very big, or you can knock out the growth hormone receptor in the pig if it's one that would grow fast, so it's now not going to grow so fast. So there are ways you can get around that problem as well. Now the other thing is, I think Sharon or somebody mentioned, people are all worried about when you transplant this pig organ into this patient, is it going to transfer some pig infectious microorganisms that we don't know much about into the patient? We know that when you transplant a human organ in, you nearly always transfer some sort of viruses like cytomegalovirus and so on. But are there going to be pig viruses that we don't know much about that you're going to transfer? So this was considerable, say, it slowed up progress for a long time because many countries decided they didn't want to move ahead until we were sure about this. But these pigs will be bred and housed in very clean, what we call designated pathogen-free facilities. Everything will be spotless. All the staff will be wearing sort of spacesuits so they can't transfer flu virus to the pigs and so on. And there will be frequent monitoring of the pigs to ensure that they're not carrying any pathogenic organisms and therefore won't pass them on with the organ transplant. And there is one virus, or a group of viruses called porcine endogenous retroviruses, which are in the nucleus of every cell in the pig. We have similar ones in our cells. Human endogenous retrovirus don't seem to do as much harm. But people were worried about these because you can't get rid of these by keeping the pigs in clean environments. And fortunately, it looks as if they don't do much harm. But in any case, the company I'm working with, they have actually knocked out those viruses using genetic engineering. So those pigs do no longer have those porcine endogenous retroviruses. So they can't be a risk anymore. So that's an important point. Now, for some years, I was on an infection safety committee, which was organized by a pharmaceutical company. And you can see me standing there on this little bridge thing here. But if you look down at the bottom of the thing, this is, remember, the safety committee. Danger, keep off. And we seem to ignore that fact, but luckily we didn't all fall into the sea. So you have to be careful which safety committee you're listening to. But I think the people I was the only one who wasn't a virologist or a bacteriologist, but I think what they said was probably sensible. Now, in recent months, the last 2 or 3 years, people have done some studies of putting a pig organ into a brain-dead subject. The patient's already dead, the decedent, just to see what happens to it. I'm not a great fan in that, because after brain death, you have an inflammatory response. After putting in a pig organ, you have an inflammatory response. After brain death, you have metabolic and hemodynamic instability, so that the patient, the brain-dead subject, may not survive for very long. And so a short period of study is probably all that you can do. And we're at a stage now, we want to know what's going to happen in a year's time, not what happened in a week's time. And so you can get very confusing results from these, so I'm not in favor of working brain-dead human subjects. Now, you heard I had the great privilege of working for Christian Barnard, who's really one of the most interesting person I've met in my life. And he said to me once, you cannot stay in the laboratory forever. There comes a time, if you have enough data in the lab, you're committed to try it in patients, because that's the purpose of medical research. And so that was something I learned a lot from him. And I firmly believe that progress will be greater when patients are being treated in a hospital setting than if we're trying to manage baboons in a laboratory. For example, baboons do not live in very hygienic conditions, no matter what effort you make. And so they're more prone to infection, whereas humans can be in a very nice, clean hospital room. They can't communicate with us and tell us, I've got a pain in my back today, or I don't feel well, whereas humans can. So that's always very helpful to the doctor. And we don't have the ability for sophisticated investigation. We don't have the scanning machine and such. They're too expensive for research. But in the hospital, you have that ability. And finally, you have intensive care units in the hospital, which we can't have intensive care in the baboon facility. So I think the results will be better for those reasons alone, as well as some other reasons which I have mentioned. Now, who are we going to select for this pig kidney transplant? And we've been through this because we've already selected patients. You can choose either high-risk patients who really have no alternative. They're going to die, and therefore you can say, well, we can offer you a pig organ. We don't know how well you're going to do, but it's your last chance, so to speak. And there are various patients who fit into that category. And the first patient we did last year, Mass General, was in that category. He was a patient who had a previous transplant, kidney transplant. He rejected it. He was on dialysis. He was running out of dialysis sites, and so he was offered a pig kidney, and he decided to go ahead with it. And he did well initially, recovered rapidly. He had some rejection after 7 days, which was reversed successfully. He was discharged from hospital within the first 3 weeks. He had excellent kidney function. The pig kidney did very well. But unfortunately, he had a previous heart attack, and he developed a rhythm disturbance in his heart, and he died on 52 days afterwards, which was very sad. We did a second patient 3 weeks ago today. I had the pleasure of watching my kidney transplant surgeons do the surgery, and he's doing very well. I mean, the kidney is working very well, and he has no problems. But it's still very early, of course. And they also did 2 transplants at New York University. The first one had heart and kidney failure, and the FDA approved them to do a pig kidney transplant, but they had to put in an assist device for the heart to support the heart. And that would make complicated things very much, and eventually the patient got rejection because they couldn't manage it very well, and died. They've also done a second one, who's now at least 60 days afterwards, but they haven't released much information about their second patient yet. So 4 kidney transplants have been carried out in the United States. Now, much preferable would be if we could use low-risk patients, optimal patients who are on the waiting list, perfectly acceptable for a transplant with a deceased human organ, not patients who are desperate who've got no other alternatives. And if we could use those patients without all these complications like having had a previous heart attack or having whatever it is, I'm sure we would do even better. And fortunately, the FDA just last week approved us and a group at another, associated with another group that makes pig kidneys or produces pigs as sources of kidneys. They've approved us to do some patients who are good candidates for transplantation, not just desperate candidates, and I think the results will now improve that. So these are what I call low-risk patients, and they're patients who are acceptable for deceased human kidney, but would likely never receive one. And this can largely be predicted based on their age, their blood type, because some blood types are more difficult to get than others, and whether they have diabetes or not. And this is a very important slide. You can see here, this is a survival on dialysis. And if you look at the line that's marked in red, wait list on dialysis, these are patients who are on the waiting list for a kidney transplant. But you can see by 60 months, 5 years, nearly half of them are dead, or they've been taken off the waiting list because they develop comorbidities which will preclude them from doing well after a transplant. And so those patients, if you told them up front, listen, you're on the waiting list, the chances are you will never get a kidney from a deceased donor. And some of these patients may be on the list for 10 years. And therefore you're likely to die during the meantime, but we could offer you a pig organ. And if that does well, even for a year or two, at least you're not on dialysis for that period of time. You can go back on dialysis afterwards if you're still functioning. So I think those are the patients that we should be aiming towards. Patients who are on the waiting list, they're good candidates, but they will probably never get a transplant. So we recently suggested that a limited clinical trial of pig kidney transplantation in these carefully selected low-risk patients was warranted. And I'm very pleased that the FDA seems to have listened to us, because last week I say they approved this as a step forward, which I was surprised about, to be honest. Now this is an important piece of data. Every day in the United States, 15 to 25 patients on the kidney wait list die or are removed from the wait list because they're no longer acceptable candidates, that's 5,000 to 9,000 people a year who are on the waiting list who will not get a transplant. They'll die before they get a transplant. If I were one of those patients or a member of one of those families of those patients, and I thought, listen, there's 5,000 or 9,000 of us going to be dead this year while we're waiting, I would take a chance with this pig kidney on the data that we have so far. So I think eventually it may become unethical not to initiate clinical trials of pig kidney transplantation. You can't sit aside and watch people die all the time without doing something about it. Furthermore, and this is a topic that Sharon has been very interested in and very active about, xenotransplantation may overcome some of the ethical problems of living human donor kidney or liver transplantation. It's been abused in certain parts of the world, and you have to prevent that from happening. And if you have an unlimited number of pig donors, nobody will need to be a living donor anymore. Now finally, I'll just say a few brief words about pig heart xenotransplantation. You probably read in 2022, my colleague Surgeon Bartley Griffith did the first heart transplant at the University of Maryland, and his patient lived for about 2 months. The patient was really so sick when they did the transplant that he never recovered from this debility from beforehand, even though the heart was working very well for at least 6 weeks at that time. But it became very difficult to manage because he was so debilitated. And if you look at the literature of pig heart transplantation in baboons or monkeys, the longest survival so to date is up to 16 months. This is one of our baboons that I'm working with a group from the Los Angeles Children's Hospital. We have a baboon at the moment who's 16 months with a pig heart in his chest and doing very well. And that's the longest that I've ever recorded. If you look at infants, if you're born with a very complex congenital heart disease, which only will be treated properly with a transplant, you have to wait on average 4 months for a human donor of that size and age to become available. And the likelihood is you're going to die in that 4 months quickly. You'll probably be dead in a week or two. So we've got the idea of you put the pig heart in the first week or two to take out this disordered human heart, and you wait then until you get a human donor, which on average takes 4 months, so maybe it'll be 2 months or 6 months, whatever it is, and then you take out the pig heart and you put in the human heart. And I think that would be the way to go with heart transplants. You're not committing the child to a pig heart for the rest of his life. You're only bridging until he gets a human heart. And I think with the experience we gain from that, will make it much easier to do permanent pig heart transplantation. I think this is the way to go, and it would be quite ethical to do this, I think. So have we solved all of the problems? Can we celebrate yet? Well, maybe we can. Maybe we are king of the castle and so on, but there's always another problem around the corner, and so maybe we shouldn't be too optimistic at the moment. And I think perhaps the pig has still got some tricks up its sleeve that will fool us, and so we need to be cautious and keep plodding on as we are now. And so where do we go from here? Well, in America it's very confusing, because you can go all over the place from here. And even when you choose where you're going to go, the sign may be completely incorrect. So we have to be careful where we go. And I think we're going in the right direction. And what major problems are left? Well, I think what we need to do now is to develop a method of storing these pig hearts and kidneys for up to 24 to 72 hours so we can ship them around the country, and ideally ship them internationally as well. If you could store a pig kidney for 3 days, it could go anywhere in the world by a standard aircraft rather than a private jet or so. So we still have that problem to solve. Now, there may be some young men and women here today who are potential surgeon scientists, that is, surgeons who actually do some research as well. And I think my advice to them is, if you're going to select a topic to do research in, make sure it will have a great impact on surgery. James, the guy who discovered DNA with Francis Crick, he said, don't choose little problems, because that'll give you little answers. Choose a big problem, that'll give you a big answer. So I think choose something that's going to be significant. And research is always challenging, exciting, never routine, but often very frustrating. And so what you need, and Roy Kahn told me once, you need a lot of curiosity, you need persistence, and you need some optimism that you're going to solve the problem eventually. It's taken us 40 years to solve this, to get as far as we have now. We still have problems left. And Tom Starzl, the other great pioneer in transplantation, he said, only those who have known complete despair can understand the full meaning of jubilation. I think that's true. When you feel rock bottom, then you understand when things are going better. Now, even in the field of xenotransplantation, there are lots of problems. We've talked about organs, just the heart and the kidney, but there's the liver and the lung that don't do so well. There's pancreatic islets to cure diabetes. You could transplant just the hepatocytes for liver cells. Corneal transplants, of course, I think one day will all be pig corneals. There's a group in Europe that's done some very good work on Parkinson's disease in monkeys, and they put dopamine-producing pig cells in the brains of the monkeys, and they cured their Parkinson's disease. Quite remarkable. And we've been doing some work on red blood cell transfusion. I think one day all the red blood cell transfusions will be from pig cells, pig blood. And there's lots of work on heart valves and skin and tissues and so on. And I like this quote from another Nobel Prize winner. He says, discovery consists of seeing what everybody else is seeing, but thinking what nobody has thought. I think you have to look at it and question what the dogma is and think of something different. And I think that's very important in research. And Tom Starzl again, this is George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, also won a Nobel Prize. In one of his plays, he says, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. So those of us in research are obviously unreasonable men. And then Tom Starzl, he said, history tells us that procedures that were inconceivable yesterday and are barely achievable today, such as xenotransplantation, often become routine tomorrow. And I think in 5 or 10 years' time, xenotransplantation will be routine. And there are so many similarities between us and animals that you think, well, of course it's going to happen because we're so similar. Here we are being rude to each other, and we all have big friends who are our buddies, and even sexual harassment takes place in the animal world, from I can see here, and crime doesn't pay even if you're a kitten. And in Britain, everybody who has a dog begins to look like their dog. And Time magazine said some time ago, men are pigs anyway. Men are really bad anyway. And so I think soon making a pig of yourself could have a whole new meaning. And I firmly believe that one day organ transplantation for deceased human donors will be of historic interest only, and we'll think what a weird thing to do when we've got these pig organs instead. So thank you very much for your attention.
Sir has shown us as a beam of hope. And while I was sitting there in the chair, I coined a new word, sir. From lasers, I coined a new word, tasers. It looks like there is thought amplification, a stimulated emission of reasoning towards xenotransplantation. I am sure you have given this address to an august audience, which has, I'm sure, many research geneticists also. And you have revealed to us that a new multidisciplinary team needs to be built up with the geneticists and clinical geneticists in the team. And I think it is not an ordinary day today. I think it is an absolutely extraterrestrial world where we have been. And thank you so much for showing us the real-time picture of where xenotransplantation is going. It's a lifetime experience for all of us. I would request the dignitaries. So, Mr. Pradip Burman, sir, Dr. Malik, Dr. Rana. So please come. May I request Mr. Tiwari to get the book for release. May we have the book series on the dais, please? Yeah.
Since David was here, we thought we'd take the opportunity of gathering together what academic achievement our unit has achieved in the last 28 years. He's kindly agreed to spend 5 or 10 minutes discussing this. We're very proud of having published a lot while we've been in the private sector, but it was a trust hospital with great support from the administration, especially Dr. Rana when he set up treatment. We thank everyone for their help. David is going to release the book.
The name of the book series is Teamwork and Academic Achievement.
Okay, so this is my second job for today, and I'm very pleased to have it too. And I'm going to read what I've written about this. This is a series of 3 volumes which the department has produced, and I'm going to introduce them to you because I think they're really a major contribution to surgery. So we'll open them up so you can see them. Okay. Yes. So it was a great honor for me to be invited to give the oration which I've just given, and also to contribute to the introduction of this book that records the remarkable achievements of the Department of Surgical Gastroenterology and Liver Transplantation at the Sir Ganga Ram Hospital. In the 3-volume book, which somebody should cut here, I'll cut it, thanks. In this 3-volume book, in which I had the privilege of contributing a brief foreword, you will find a summary of the achievements of the department. All of the hundreds of publications from the department between 1996 and 2024 are beautifully reprinted here. The book is splendidly produced and contains a wealth of information. So in the introduction, written by Dr. Nandi, we learn something of his goals when he established the department. He writes, "My main long-term aims were, if possible, to care for patients on the basis of ethical practice and scientific principles, to train residents to a high standard, do interesting and meaningful research, publish regularly, and start and establish a liver transplant program." He has clearly achieved all of these goals, which I think is remarkable. So, the reports collected in these volumes are based on the hospital records, which he was very keen to keep very accurately. And no fewer than almost 20,000 patients have contributed to the data in these books. The achievements of the department are all quite remarkable, but among the most important and impressive is the number of surgical trainees that have received some or all of their training at the hospital. Many of whom have been supported by Gyan Burman scholarships. This has had a wide influence on surgery in the whole of India and even worldwide. as you heard when we heard where these fellows came from. The book is also of interest because it records the memories of some of those young surgeons who trained at the hospital. And one points out in one of these books, Dr. Nandi did daily rounds, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I suggest that that is one major reason why the surgical results of the department have been so good. What has also impressed me immensely is how Shamran has been able to combine his very demanding clinical surgical responsibilities with the clinical research, administration and teaching, which I assure you is not easy. It requires very varying skills and immense mental and physical energy. Surgery, particularly of the liver, is physically and mentally and at times emotionally draining and demanding. The other very impressive feature of the book is the number of and variety of medical papers that have been published by Sharon and his many members of his team in peer-reviewed journals. Sharon clearly has a gift for writing and has used this ability to contribute to the medical literature at all levels. Many of the papers are being written in highly specialized papers for academic surgeons. More basic educational papers for training surgeons are also included, and articles aimed at educating the lay public are also included. He has also kept the public informed through media such as the television. All of these skills take preparation and different abilities. He's clearly directed much effort towards maintaining the ethical standards in medicine, which I greatly applaud. The very long list of published manuscripts included in the pages of these 3 volumes is evidence of the productivity of his department, and certainly of his own pen. From reading about his achievements, I've come to realize that he is a man of broad interest and abilities and immense energy and application. I also have a considerable interest myself in writing, and I remember this developed when I was really quite young, at a time when I'd only just learned to read and write. When I was sick with one of the many minor childhood infections that affected us in the rather miserable climate of the United Kingdom in those days, coughs, colds, high temperatures and so on, and I was confined to bed, or at least to home for the day, my mother, I think fearing I would suffer boredom and become irritable, might come and ask me, what would you like to do today? Would you like to draw a picture? Would you like to play a game or do a puzzle? Or listen to some music? Or would you like to write a story? I inevitably chose to write a story. She would then bring me paper and pencils. I would spend a good deal of time sharpening the pencils and placing them and the sheets of paper neatly in front of me. And then I would plan to write. But I could never think of anything to write about. So I was forced to come to the conclusion that I did not have much of an imagination. And yet this desire to write remained in me. And later in life, however, I realized that imaginative storytelling, fiction, is only one small facet of writing, and there are many other ways of fulfilling one's desire to write. And I think Sharon's probably found the same thing. Medicine research gives one the opportunity. Reporting a patient with an unusual disorder or a novel treatment, for example, or reporting the results of a clinical trial of a new treatment or of a laboratory experiment. Biography provides another opportunity of writing, and providing the public with healthcare education is another. So indeed, writing has taken up much of my time, as it certainly must take up much of Sharon's time. Today, in my role as a mentor to several junior surgical research fellows, one of my major responsibilities is guiding them on how to present their research in a paper for publication in a medical journal. This takes a good deal of time, particularly as most of the research fellows I have mentored over the past 35 years English was not their home language. So they had an extra barrier to resolve. Every single paper or article published may take between 10 or 20 revisions, so it's a long process. And consider how much effort then has been put into writing the almost 500 papers and chapters collected together in these 3 volumes. I suspect that Sherman's writing, like mine, was influenced by our time working with the great Lord Brock, who we mentioned before. Brock insisted that we should write clearly and honestly. If you wrote that in a series of heart operations one patient was lost, he would immediately challenge you, what do you mean one patient was lost? If he sadly died, say he died. And so we were focusing in on reporting correctly and without any confusion. From reading some of these papers and articles in these 3 volumes, it is obvious to me that this involved a huge amount of work by a large number of authors over very many years. For gastrointestinal surgeons, I would suggest that having a copy of this magnificent collection of papers is mandatory. You will gain valuable knowledge from the Ganga Ram experience about any surgical problem you face. Just by looking through the titles of the papers and articles included in these volumes, one's interest is stimulated. The majority of the contents are, as I say, solid clinical reports relating to gastrointestinal surgery, including liver transplantation. Some reporting the massive experience of the hospital. For example, one report is on 2,255 emergency abdominal operations carried out in the GI unit at the hospital. But many others address widely differing topics, some related to medicine and others not. How can one not be interested to read articles with such varying titles as HIV and AIDS, pain, are women better surgeons than men, or suicide deaths among medical students, residents and physicians in India? All extremely interesting topics. There is even one with a simple but intriguing title, Sex, which I have not yet dared to read. Several discuss a topic that has obviously been very close to Sherman's heart, namely ethics, for example, ethics in surgery, corruption in Indian healthcare, and so on. Even topics of international importance have sometimes been discussed. For example, the myth of nuclear deterrence in South Asia. The articles include obituaries on several leading surgeons, for example, Roy Khan and Paul McMaster, both lamented good friends of mine, as they were of Sherman. And it was interesting to me that I also contributed obituaries on the same surgeons, but to different journals. There are reviews of books related to surgery. For example, biographies of famous surgeons. There are some of us, and I would include Sherman and me among them, who have this urge to write on any topic that captures our interest. 2 of my mentors, Roy Khan and Chris Barnard, were similarly driven to write on widespread topics. They also often felt they must write, and I think that's something that writers have inside them. So I hope many of you will obtain copies of these volumes so that you can not only support the work of the department, but also share in the wealth of material in each volume. I would urge you to do this, even though I could not persuade Sherman to give me a 20% commission on every volume that was purchased. Fortunately, unlike others in the news at present, I'm unable to threaten to add a tariff to every book that is purchased. Some years ago, I edited a book on doctors who are best known for their contributions to society outside of medicine. They included leading sportsmen, politicians, academic experts in fields other than medicine, many with wide interests, including, by the way, Che Guevara, the gorilla, South American gorilla, and another doctor who became head of the entire United States Army, starting out as a doctor. And for example, many of the doctors became well-known and successful writers. For example, the romantic poet John Keats, one of the greatest poets in English literary history, trained in medicine at Guy's Hospital in London, where we trained in the same hospital. Unfortunately for Keats, he relinquished medicine at a very young age. He died tragically in 1821 from tuberculosis while still in his 20s. Other writers who were doctors include St. Luke, who contributed the gospel to the writing of the Bible, and the Italian poet Dante. And in more modern times, there's Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame. He was a doctor. The great Russian playwright and short story writer Anton Chekhov was a doctor. The English novelist W. Somerset Maugham and the American ophthalmologist Robin Cook, who wrote Coma and other bestsellers, were doctors. And I had the pleasure of teaching Michael Crichton, the author of Jurassic Park, The Andromeda Strain, and many other immensely popular books, when he was a student at Harvard Medical School in the 1960s. I remember him particularly well because whereas I am 6 feet 5 inches tall, he was 6 feet 9 inches tall. So I congratulate Shamron and his numerous co-authors, some of whom are here today, for presenting us with such a wealth of information and interest. The volumes are an immensely valuable record of the work of a top surgical team whose vast experience is clearly important to other gastrointestinal surgeons today and will be of a major historical interest for many years to come. All who contributed to this outstanding collection have my sincere admiration. Thank you very much.
So we were taught that the thing worth doing is worth doing well. And Dr. David Cooper has delivered a very passionate lecture on how good these books could be. It's been very motivating to hear you, sir. The Institute, as well as the Gyan Burman Liver Surgery Unit, could not have been bestowed with a bigger honor. Thank you so much, sir. I will now request Ms. Gyan Burman to please present a plaque to Dr. David Cooper. Ms. Gyan Burman is Mr. Gyan Burman's granddaughter. May I request Dr. Amitabh to deliver a vote of thanks, please? I would request the others to take their chairs.
Good evening to all our distinguished guests. It is my privilege that I have been given a task to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of our department. At the onset, we would like to thank Dr. Rana for giving the welcome address. Madam, your legacy as the first Gyan Burman fellowship candidate is always special for all of us. We would like to thank Professor D.S. Rana sir, Chairman Ganga Ram Trust Society, for bestowing his blessings and having faith in the fellowship program. We would like to thank Professor V.K. Malik sir, Dean Gripman, for giving a succinct yet comprehensive history of our institution. We are also thankful to you, sir, for providing us all the academic help to run this program successfully. We will give a sincere thanks to Mr. Pradip Burman for reminding us all about the inspiring story of late Mr. Burman, whose name is now immortal in the form of this fellowship program. We are also thankful to the whole Gyan Burman family, who has given us a continuous, untiring financial support in the last 20-22 years to run this program smoothly. A big thank you to Professor Samir Nandi, who has always been a driving force behind all our academic activities in the institution. He has given a very warm and befitting introduction of Professor Cooper. Thank you, sir, for being a motivational force behind the academic activities in our institution. We'd like to thank Professor Cooper, who has come all the way from US and delivered an indistinctly succinct and deliberate lecture on this topic of xenotransplantation. Sir, your delivery has been wonderful, and we all sitting here resonate very well with you on the topic of xenotransplantation. We would like to thank our departmental chairman, Professor Dr. Samitra Rawat, for giving us a continuous support to run this program smoothly. We would like to thank people behind the curtain, our residents, our fellow consultants, the administrative staff of our department, and Mr. Parmanand Tiwari, those who have worked tirelessly to make this task possible. At the end, I'd like to thank you all for coming here and taking some time from your busy schedule. Hope we have had an enriching experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amita. I have had 22 years of umbilical cord connect with this department, courtesy Gyan Burman family. Thank you so much. I would now want to invite all of you for drinks and dinner in the fountain lawn. Please join us for drinks and dinner.